Okay, this is my Porsche 970 Panamera. I bought it at 10 years old, just got it, and there are a few things that need some attention. One of the things that bugs me, probably more than it should, is the degradation of the applique here on the doors. It's only on the driver's side, it's a UK, so it's the right hand side of the car. I don't know what causes this, but it seems to be fairly common with Panamera owners. So I'd quite like to deal with this, but it's quite a big job as far as I can tell, and it seems like a dealer would want a lot of money to do it, so I'm going to have a look at doing it myself. So this is a door from the same car, Porsche 970 Panamera. I bought it from a scrap dealer because I wanted to practice this repair before doing it on my real car, doing it on my own car. I particularly was nervous about making a mistake that made me, or would make me, take it to a dealer to get it fixed. This is the rear right door. I chose a rear door because it's not supposed to be possible to replace the applique on the rear doors without removing the large trim. And the trim is, according to the catalogue, around a $300 part. Pretty expensive. Don't want to be spending that kind of cash if I can avoid it. I actually picked up 2 replacement appliques from eBay, the OEM parts, but they were about $60 each. So not too much money. Don't really want to be spending 5 times as much on the trim. There are a number of rubber trims as well, and I'm going to have a look at what the issues are with those as we go. And I should say that I've already taken this apart and put it back together once. That means I've had some practice. I won't be wasting your time while you watch me make lots of mistakes. And hopefully this will be a useful video for anyone who wants to think about doing something similar. So, something the dealer did, the scrap dealer did, was he took off the window regulator motor down the bottom. You can see it just down here. That's where it should engage. And the window, as you can see at the moment, is down. Now that's actually quite good because there are 2 screws that we need to get to in here and remove to detach the inner frame from the door panel. But one thing that I learned is you cannot separate the inner door frame from the door panel with the window down. So you're going to have to be able to lower and raise the window a couple of times in this process. Taking these 2 screws out you can do before you take anything else apart in the door. Once you've taken off the inner door card, this big panel that clips onto the top of this frame here, you can take those 2 screws out, and that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. So I recommend taking those 2 screws out and then raising the window. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So just to show you these 2 screws, got a little inspection light here, and down there in the gap between the inner and outer parts of the door, you can see a screw head, and you come along, there's another one in here, there you go, just in there. Now if you take those screws out and drop them, you're kind of committed. You are going to be taking the inner skin off the door to retrieve those. So I recommend using a magnetic tool to remove these. They are a Torx T25, so pretty straightforward thing to remove. Just need to take care not to drop the screws as you do this. So you can actually get your fingers down in there to help support the screw on the end of the tool. recommend doing that. I'm just resting the light on here so I can see the screw as I do this. Obviously, if the window was up, you would not be able to reach these screws, which is why the window needs to be down for this step. And I went and dropped the screw. So there you go, I am committed to taking this apart. The other two screws that are connected to that, same piece of trim, you need to get off. One of them is behind the rubber at the end, the door. So let's just pull that off. There we go, so here's one of them. Same size, T25 again. And there's one at the other end as well. Where is it? It's under here somewhere. There we go, just tucked in between the rubbers here. Okay, that's those 4 screws out. Now we need to remember to raise the window. If the door's still on the car, that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. Otherwise, it seems to me like the way you're going to have to do that is probably remove the window regulator and use some tools of some sort to engage with the drive shaft for the window regulator and drive the window up. Let's see if I can do that by hand here. Yeah. So to drive it up, looks like it's a clockwise twist. And up comes the window. I guess this is probably not recommended in case you break something, but since this is a scrap window, I'm not too worried about it. Because the regulator isn't on, by the time it starts to come up, I can just get down there and pull the window up. That was nice and straightforward. So now there's nothing stopping me going ahead and separating the inner door panel from the skin. A couple of things we can do just to help this along. One is ease this rubber through here, just separate it, push the edges in, squeeze it through. That's the door release just there. And at the end of the door over here, we've also got this old rubber here for the door stay, and there's this one for the connectors, which we can push through. We're going to want to push them through into the door because they are going to stay attached at the other end. So to get them moving in through this hole, we're going to have to get the rubber out and then push it back in. Just use a little tool here to persuade this. There we go.
Oh, it's just gone in nice and easy. And we want that in, so I'm going to push it through. So it's not going to be a pain for me.
I'm doing this one-handed, a sort of single person. I would suggest that you want someone to help you with this two-man job separating these. Okay, all pretty straightforward. Next job is to remove the fasteners holding everything together here. I'm going to start by removing the aluminium fasteners at the top of the door. What do I mean by that? Aluminium. So we've got some stretch bolts on this, and if you look at the service manual, they are specified for a torque and then an angle after you've reached the torque, which means that you're stretching them. They shouldn't really be reused, and I guess that Porsche will tell you they absolutely shouldn't be reused. I'm sure they have something to do with energy absorption and an impact, like in a crash situation. These big aluminium fasteners along here. There's one at the end there. Can't remember if there's one around here. Don't think there is. Let's have a go. Take these out. There's a washer on each of these and you don't really want to drop those, and that's what the fastener looks like. And there's one under the same rubber at this end of the door. Go. And the tool for those aluminium stretch bolts, by the way, was a T45, a Torx 45. So next up we've got some smaller black screws to remove. A number of them around the door here, starting here. I don't think there's one around here, is there? No, nothing around there. One there, there. So let's start anywhere. This is a T27, Torx 27. Just left the bottom one there deliberately. You want something to stabilise this. That's a take it apart. And this is really a two-man job. If this were a real door and I was worried about damaging it, marking it, I would be getting someone to help with this. And more here.
should just be the one at the bottom left now, I think. Double check. Yeah, it all feels free. Good. Let's go ahead with this then. I'm not worried about what happens with this door, so I'm going to let it drop if it wants to drop. There are a few things that might stop it, cables and so on inside. Yeah, it didn't fall. As I said, the window needs to be up for this because the window goes down behind some components of the outer skin. So if you don't have the window up at this stage, you're going to struggle. You'll wonder why you can't get it loose. That lifted off fairly easily. Now, I need to feed the door release cable through. And get that inside. On the left hand side as I'm looking at it, I've already released the door stay, and there are two connectors here, two electrical connectors I need to get out. Not so easy to see. That's being a pain. What you could do is release this cable tie here, which will give you some more length to get to these connectors. Might be wise. Aha. Okay, so that's those connectors out. Just feeding the door release through. There's a rubber bung on the door release assembly which gets kind of stuck on the inside here. Feeding the whole thing through. Okay, now on the left, over here we've got this main cable assembly. There's a little clip here. You need to feed the whole assembly behind this strut across the door. Out from underneath the door stay. Not too bad. Difficult with a one-man job. Not so tough if it's two. This is the rubber bung that's a bit sticky on that cable. And this end of the door release can be separated by twisting it, sliding it out. That's another way to get a bit of length. Just clips back in like that. For the two electrical connectors, let me see if I can show you those. So these are the two electrical connectors that I had to disconnect. This large thick one here needs a squeeze on both sides. That allows you to pull it out. You can see there are little catches there that are affected when I squeeze it. This one, this little grey tab needs to be pulled out. That releases the catch in there and then it pulls out. Fairly straightforward. Okay, next thing I want to do with this is remove the glass. The glass is in the way for most of what we're going to do with the applique. I need to remove it. As you know, on this one, there's no motor on the window regulator. so I'm able to slide this by hand. I want to fully open the window. Get a finger purchase on that. And then I'm going to want to undo that one screw there, which is I think a 225, Torx 25. It's got the large washer on it. There we go. And you want to keep the screw and the large washer. The washer's captive. Now it's worth noting that this attachment between the slider and the bottom of the window is not freely adjustable. So there is a little set of teeth, which I hope you can see here. Teeth just here on the upper edge here between the white part, which is on the slider, and the black part, which is attached to the window. There are teeth. So I would make a note or take a picture of the position that you find this in before you dismantle it. I don't care about this door, so I'm going to skip that step and just go ahead and remove the glass. So this is fairly straightforward. Just pull the black plastic part that's attached to the window up, and then you're going to want to slide the whole thing down. There are a couple of runners engaged with the rails both sides. You don't want to break those runners, so don't try and lever the thing away from the door frame. Just slide it all the way down, straight as you can. There we go. And just to show you what I mean by those runners, we've got these assemblies on both sides at the end of the window, and they engage with the rails. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the shelf. So I already mentioned that one of my objectives with this exercise is to minimize the costs with other components. So I'm quite keen to be able to reuse as many trim elements as possible. The one that gave me the biggest problem first time I took this door apart was this L-shaped trim that runs from the back of the door all the way along to the front edge and then down the edge of the applique, and it's this section that's problematic. Right now I don't know whether I could separate this trim out from the big oval trim that runs around the door, whether I could separate this rubber trim from this metal trim here without removing the metal trim. And I understand that removing the metal trim requires you to break things, breaks clips. So I don't want to do that. I want to leave it attached. I'm going to have a go at some point to see whether I can get this rubber out of the metal and whether I can get it back in, more importantly, or whether I can get a new one in, which is really the key question. Because the problem is the rubber trim is bonded to the applique down this line. Like I said, I already separated this, but it's a really thin adhesive bond, so you can't cut it. I ended up trying and mostly cut into the rubber, but you want to separate it down the length. If I was doing it again, I would probably try and use some kind of chemical debonding agent to get in there and eat away at the adhesive and take my time over separating this so that I can reuse this rubber trim, maybe with a strip of double-sided adhesive tape or even an adhesive transfer tape to reattach this to the new applique. Anyway, that's a step you got to do, take that off. And you're going to have to do that before you allow anything here to move because there's a risk of breaking the rubber. Next step really is to remove this surround here. It's attached in two different ways. There are adhesive pads that run down the edge, that edge and the bottom, and then there are clips that run along the top. Okay, what I'm trying to do here is separate this internal trim in the window surround. Down the sides what we have is adhesive pads. There's a locator clip as well halfway down. It's basically double-sided adhesive pads. The same is true along the bottom. And they're supposedly stuck to the inner frame of the door and down this side as well. Little adhesive pads that want to separate. it's not too difficult down the sides. So at the top we got some clips. For the upper trim, what you're trying to do is unhook some attachment points here on the trim. So you need to get something to get hold of, like the edge of the trim. Now I'm going to pull up and then just use what I've got hold of to ease the trim out of the frame, pulling it outwards and then downwards. So pull up, pull out and pull down. There we go, that's the whole trim out. If I show you what's going on the inside here, you've got these clips like this one here by my thumb that hooks over the little catches on the top of the door there, and then down the sides we have this double-sided adhesive pads. They're going to be pretty easy to replace, so if you have any trouble, I would get a sharp knife out and separate those with a knife. The one down the bottom's well out of view, but it's a long continuous one. As I said, it wasn't very well attached on this door, so this was easy enough to remove first time round. Having said that, we have a soft plastic outer on this trim, but on the back what you can see is relatively hard plastic, and I did manage to crack it when I didn't know how this was attached, so you can see it split through here. Not sure that's a huge problem, but it's something to watch out for. Okay, so what removing that trim has done is it's exposed these rivets. You can see 3 rivet heads, so we're going to have to remove those. Really just to get the flexibility so that this trim can be moved out of the way and allow us to slide this applique out. So it's these 3 rivet heads here. When I took this apart last time, I worked out that these are 3.2mm rivets. And by measuring the stubs that I had left, I worked out that we're looking for a 3.2 by 10mm rivet to replace these. And all I'm going to use is a 3mm drill on slow, dead slow with this nice drill, just to drill out the head using the central hole of the guide, and just trying to separate the head from the rest of the rivet. I don't want to open up any of the part that the rivet goes into, so I'm going nice and easy here. Okay, I'm too far in by now, so I should have already broken the head off. I'm going to switch to a 3.5mm drill and take real care to make sure that I don't end up opening up the trim. There we go. Now the head is separated, still attached with a little bit of aluminium. These are aluminium rivets. There's the head off. There we go, that's the head off that one. That's the head off that one. Okay. We're going to want to try and retrieve those bodies, and we want to get rid of all the swarf as well at some point.
So the next thing I'm going to do is remove the screws. These 3 screws that you can see here, 4 in fact, 4 screws, my apologies. Okay, so what removing that trim has done is it's exposed these rivets. You can see 3 rivet heads, so we're going to have to remove those. Really just to get the flexibility so that this trim can be moved out of the way and allow us to slide this applique out. So it's these 3 rivet heads here. When I took this apart last time, I worked out that these are 3.2mm rivets. And by measuring the stubs that I had left, I worked out that we're looking for a 3.2 by 10mm rivet to replace these. And all I'm going to use is a 3mm drill on slow, dead slow with this nice drill, just to drill out the head using the central hole of the guide, and just trying to separate the head from the rest of the rivet. I don't want to open up any of the part that the rivet goes into, so I'm going nice and easy here. Okay, I'm too far in by now, so I should have already broken the head off. I'm going to switch to a 3.5mm drill and take real care to make sure that I don't end up opening up the trim. There we go. Now the head is separated, still attached with a little bit of aluminium. These are aluminium rivets. There's the head off. There we go, that's the head off that one. That's the head off that one. Okay. We're going to want to try and retrieve those bodies, and we want to get rid of all the swarf as well at some point. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove the screws. These 3 screws that you can see here, 4 in fact, 4 screws, my apologies. Okay, these 4 screws, T25, fairly straightforward to remove. One thing that it says to do in the workshop manual is to mark the position of these screws. Mark the position of the applique before you remove these screws as well. I haven't done that, again, it's because I don't care about this door particularly, but to make sure everything goes back together properly and the 2 rails for the window are parallel, you probably want to do that. Okay, so we should be in a position more or less to separate this top trim. So let's have a go with that. Yeah, so it eases aside. It's got the rubber attached. We still have this inner window frame rubber here attached. It's attached along the top, and it's attached into the applique as well, and it goes down the other side. Now I took this out the first time around, and I think I'm going to have to do the same thing this time as well, which is a bit of a pain because it's not the easiest thing to get back in. You can probably see I did some damage getting it out last time, and I would plan to replace this trim if I do this on my car. So looking for a replacement for that. It's actually keyed into a T-slot that runs all the way down this edge of the applique. It's keyed into a T-slot down that edge as well. That one was relatively easy, this one relatively difficult, don't know why. What I did last time, I'm going to do again this time, is pull it out of the applique because it's kind of going to be a pain otherwise. And I'm just going to tug it. It's not very good for it. I don't think it likes this process. There we go, that's out. Now I'm not going to take it out of the other edge, there's no reason to. I think you can live with it as it is now. So next step is going to be to just move this main trim aside and slide the applique out. Down here there's a little clip, little hook that's hooked into the rubber trim that runs along this edge of the window. That needs to be separated. It's a little bit awkward, but you can use a little Allen key to get in behind it. It's actually snapped on this one now, which is a shame, but it's part of the replacement applique, so not a problem if you do that with the dismantling. You're going to have to find the end of the hook and retrieve it, but that's okay. So let's see about getting it out. So I'm going to move this top trim out and forward, and then just start sliding the applique out. Pretty horrible noise doing that. The applique, which is plastic, is a close fit down the whole length on this metal part, and I'm guessing it's just rubbing on the edges on the inside. There's no visible damage despite the noise on the outside. One thing that you need out of this is there's a little hex nut there with an integral washer. You need to retain that. It fits into this hole here in the applique, in the replacement applique. So this applique is actually not in bad shape. I wouldn't have changed this if this were my real door applique. And as I say, no apparent damage from that scraping noise that you just heard. Okay, a couple of things we want to do before we start putting this back together. One is we want to retrieve those bits of the rivets, and back here there's actually a handy little stop right where I'm touching there. So the rivet end is sitting in a little gutter there. It's not going to go further down into the door, which is nice, and we just want to try and recover it from there. coming up this end. What have I got? There's one. Just need to push it through from the other side. Just going to use a little hex key to push it. There we go, and this one. There we go. And you can see there's the little end of the rivet there. It's aluminium, so what that was attached to is a little steel end. You can just see the steel end of the snapped off bar down the middle. Of course, this is a magnetic tool, which is why we get that attraction. There we go, that's that one. And up here, that's another one. Now, I kind of pulled that trim out to get access there, and I was probably a little bit enthusiastic pulling it. So I want to try and get some of this back in, and the trim isn't mobile here, so this is where the rear end rail is for the window. I need to try and tuck that back in underneath the aluminium trim and just encourage it to re-engage properly, which doesn't seem that difficult to do. And just working along from both ends. You might wonder why I'm doing this with the door up on its edge, like this. And really the only reason is to make it a little bit easier to video. I would probably lie this down on a couple of cushions on a bench or something like that if I was doing it with my real door. There we go. So the other thing I said I was going to do earlier was see whether it's possible to remove this trim and reattach it. So we've got the aluminium trim still slightly mobile. The rubber's hooked underneath, so let's just pull that out. That was easy. Okay, and this part is just hooked under, so that wants to come out. And then it's tucked in there. It looks like it's only squeezed in on one side. That's coming out pretty easy. Doesn't look like whether or not the aluminium trim is attached makes any difference to how easy or hard that's going to be to remove or reattach. Let's have a go at putting some of it back in. And this bit goes underneath there. That goes in there. Well, that seemed pretty straightforward, so do you know what? I might just go ahead and get a replacement for that and throw this away rather than try and recover this bonded joint to the applique. I don't think those rubbers are particularly expensive. Okay, next step, let's get this applique back in. So first things first, I want to just lift this trim a little bit and then relax the lift and push it forward a little bit. And then we're going to try and engage this shape here, which is that kind of S curve with the S curve on the metal.
That little hook is awkward, it gets in the way, requires a little bit more of a pull to get it below the trim. There we go. Door's a bit loose there. Let's just get it back. Just slide it down. The rubber trim on the top here is protecting the applique, which is good. And down the bottom, just want to make sure we don't catch the aluminium trim. Feels like I'm out of position. There we go. There we go. That's it back in place. One thing I do need, you remember we retained that hex nut with the integral washer on it. Need to remember to install that. So I'm just going to ease the applique up. Just ½ an inch. So here we've got the applique, and just here's the little hex receptacle on the applique that stops the nut turning when it's installed. So just need to coax this into position. And it needs to fit flush in there. It's a little awkward because there's no practical way to turn it except with nudging it around with your fingertips. But that's it in position. And then that gets nicely held in place when I slide the applique down into place. And you can see it's trapped now. The metal is between the two, between one side of the applique and the nut, so it's not going anywhere anymore. And that's the trim back in place. Now, if I hadn't broken it off, one of my next steps would be to hook the little hook on the trim on the applique into this rubber seal on the bottom of the window. The step after that is to put these 4 screws back in. If you marked the position of the applique in relation to the screws, in relation to the frame rather, when you before you took it out, great. Try and reposition it all nicely. If not, you're going to be reassembling something like I am here. There is some movement on this, so you can kind of see why they want you to mark it. And I think I would if it was the real thing, just in case there were any big discrepancies. So one thing I do when I've got a pattern of screws to put in is make sure that I put them all in before I do any of them up. So I want to make sure that I don't end up distorting the components to make the screws go in. So this one up at the top here, we've got various bits of rubber that need to be in the right place. This needs to hook over there, and down it goes. So the screw goes through the trim, through the applique, through the metal into the nut. Okay, I've just made a beginner's error. Before I do up the top one, I need to get this trim back into place. So let's remove that top one. Okay, so we've got everything in position here except this window frame seal trim is not refitted yet. Need to get this back into this slot on the inside of the applique here. So first thing I'm going to do is try and wedge this somewhere to give us the space to work. So let's see. I get it in. Maybe there. No, not quite. How about there? Yeah, that looks pretty good. So we're just holding the trim here out of place. Now this rubber is pretty sticky. I found earlier that it's difficult to slide in. What I'm using here is a little bit of Taylor's chalk. If you've got some chalk powder, if you've got some probably blackboard chalk would do. If you play snooker or pool and use some chalk, I'm guessing that would do. And just going to apply it down the length of the seal. That's interesting. I've obviously done some damage having taken this out twice. There's actually a fibre reinforcement inside this seal. That's pretty cool. That gives me some confidence in not just stretching it every time you put it in, take it out. So I'm just running down the part of the seal that engages the applique. The other chalk you could use would be bicycle puncture repair chalk. That's going to be exactly the right thing because it's trying to serve the same purpose, allow a rubber thing to slide freely in place. Okay, now I'm going to feed this in. So I just need to find the end of the slot. There we go. And I'm going to ease it down. It gets harder as you go, unfortunately. Just want to try and ease the whole thing. Probably just have to end up taking your time, being patient with it. If it gets sticky, just work from one end to the other. Ease it in. Door's just moving around here, so I'm just using my foot to steady it. As I said earlier, I'd probably have this lying down on a bench with a couple of cushions under it if I weren't trying to film it. Don't want to go too far, it'd probably be quite difficult to pull back out if we wanted it. Just need to try and get this bit fitted in the top now. So I'm going to take this screwdriver out. Let the trim go back to where it wants to be, make sure the rubbers are in the right place. It needs to be behind there. There we go. Just try and get this window frame rubber to sit in the right place without twisting as I push it in. It's a little awkward. Still, it's easy enough to pull out and adjust if it feels like it's gone the wrong place. Okay, so it feels like we want to just move this down a tiny bit more, a couple of millimeters, just to give everything space up here. Right. And this top screw here goes through the aluminium trim, through the applique, through the metalwork, and into the nut. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a last look at this trim here, make sure I'm happy with the position, which I'm not perfectly. That's much better. Good, so that's all the screws in. And if we'd made any markings, we'd be checking against them. I guess the place to draw is around the edge of the applique up here, really. That's probably the only marking that makes any sense. The ones under the screw heads probably don't give you any significant information for positioning this thing. Maybe they do. I guess put the markings wherever you want to. So I'm tightening off all 4 screws. So that's the new applique in. Next step is to refit the this internal trim here. So if I was doing this with new adhesive pads in, I'd make sure I left the backing on the tape or pads, one side or the other, and put an extender through so that I can pull the backing off with the trim left in situ. As you see, there's no adhesive along the top, so this is kind of our positioning that we can use to reference the position for the whole thing. And we've got these tabs down the edge here that align into these slots as well. Everything else is held in place with the adhesive. So what I did last time, let's see if it works again, slid it down and then get the trim behind the window frame trim, and ease it up into position. Just try and make sure that all the bits and edges are in the right place in relation to the other bits of trim. I think it's fairly obvious when you see it. There's a little lip on this trim I'm putting in here that needs to go behind the other rubber trim at the top. Otherwise nothing fits quite right. And then down this edge we've got those tabs, so they need to be in place. That's that in place. So next thing to do is to get these clipped back in. And I'm just going to squeeze and you can hear it click. So that's the clips on the top edge done. Next I would work down this edge and remove any adhesive backing. Next I'd go down this back edge and remove any adhesive backing, push that into place. And then finally I would do the bottom edge. It's out of sight, but it does keep all the rubbish out of your door, so it's fairly important that it's stuck in place properly. So that's that trim back in place. As I mentioned earlier, I did crack one side or the other. I can't even remember which it was. It doesn't seem to affect the appearance or function of the seal in any significant way. Just going to tease this into the right place. There we go. Okay, next step is to replace the rivets. These are the guys I'm using. Blue Spot aluminium rivets, 3.2 by 10. I don't know Blue Spot, I don't know if they're a high quality brand or not. These appear to fit really well, and the grip length specifications that I could find on the site where I bought them matched up nicely with what I measured when I removed the original rivets. Simple enough to use. I would tend to put rivets in all of the holes. Again, it's a bit like the philosophy with the screw patterns. If you've got them all in, you won't end up fighting to fit the later ones. I don't have any particular logic to this, but I reckon if you work from one end to the other and you start building stresses in, there's a chance it'll get more difficult or the fit will deteriorate. So I'm going to go from the middle first. You need to kind of watch the tool here. The tool wants to interfere with the trim a little bit. Okay, and there's the tail broken off. So that one's in, done. Going to one end or the other, doesn't think it matters particularly. That's the second tail. And the other end. Okay, all three done. Feels nice and secure. Next step is to refit this trim, and we've got the clips along the top. The other sides are going to be adhesive, held in place with adhesive pad. So we've got double-sided, fairly thick, I don't know, I guess millimetre thick adhesive pads down both sides and all the way along the bottom here. And I'd want to replace those if I was putting this back in, or put an adhesive transfer tape on, which would probably do the job as well, just to give it some new tack. And all I'm going to do is slide the bottom in first. You can see we've got the clips along the top. We've also got some little alignment features down the side here. Those alignment features line up with these slots. So the top and the right hand or front edge of the window, I reckon, are the datums. I'm just going to slide this in bottom first, and then get this edge behind the window frame seal that we put in place. There's a lip at the top here that needs to go in behind the frame seal at the top. Just getting the whole thing in position before I start fixing anything. There we go. And you can just hear them clip into place. There's a little lip along the top of this seal that needs to go behind the window frame seal, otherwise it's not going to reach the catches that we just clipped into, and a little lip down the side wants to go behind the frame seal as well. So for the adhesive lengths, I would have put some extended backing on the adhesive so that I could now peel it with the whole trim in place. Rather than trying to peel it and then position it without getting stuck in the wrong place. That feels pretty good. Next step is to refit the glass. We've got these little sliders here on both sides that we're going to want to slide into the rails. So the sliders are in the rails on both sides, and it's a little bit tricky. The window wants to go sideways all the time, and then jam, and just wiggling it to progressively move it up. There we go. And I'm going to relocate this fitting back in the right location. If you made a note of where it was in relation to where the black plastic part and the white plastic part were in relation to each other, you want to probably try and match that. I didn't, so there we go. It's about middle. And screw with the big washer goes back in. Okay, that's the glass back in. So the glass is in, just going to check the fit, make sure it slides all the way, goes to a nice positive stop. All the seals look pretty good, that was easy enough. And we want the window closed to reattach the inner door frame to the door. Okay, next step is to put the door back together. So I'll probably lie this down to show you what I'm doing here. One of the slightly awkward things to do is to feed this main harness behind this strut on the door. Complete with the rubber bung, and then there's this clip as well, and the clip goes onto that frame member there, and then the harness comes out through this hole, and the rubber bung does as well. We'll reinstall that from the outside. This is easy enough to do. Okay, we need to get this end of the strut through that hole on the inner frame. We need to hook up the two connectors and the door release. So let's put this up right now. So I need to feed the door release behind the rear window frame rail. Goes out through the hole. And the bung behind it needs to fit into this hole as well, so we need the bung to come through. This is definitely a two-man job if you're doing it on a real car. There's the bung. See if I can get it fitted properly. There we go, that's the bung fitted. And we've got two connectors. I'm going to take my watch off for this, it's all been constrained. Shorter space back here. One, and that's the other, not forgetting the little tab on the smaller of the two connectors. Okay, now making sure that we've got the strut through the hole. Okay, with everything through, I'm going to lift it up and offer it up in the right position. Okay, so a quick check, the bung is still in place, the strut is through the hole. We've got that bung to seat. that's in place, and this bung wants to pull through and click into place as well. That's good. So the cable release is there, these connectors all fine. Only one screw in place at the moment. So the next step is to put all the other screws. So I've put one in at that end of the door. The best one to make sure that it's located properly after that is going to be one the other end of the door. So let's put this one in. Should make it a bit easier to get all the others in. I'm not tightening anything until I've got all the screws in. That's all the screws, so I can torque them up. Okay, next we've got the 4 little screws for the trim. So the 2 end ones can go in as the door is.
And this rubber can go back on this end. It just goes behind the door seal here. And then snaps into position. Making sure the rubbers are correctly located at the end, which they are. And then the last two screws we have to do are these two hidden ones behind the window. So at this point you will have the door back together on the car, and you can presumably use electric opener if you've reinstalled the regulator motor. If you haven't, slide it down by hand. Green light so I can see what I'm doing. There is room to get a finger through alongside the screw, and since we're going to have to take the door apart again to recover this, if I drop it, I'll be very careful. It's one screw in but not tight. And at the other end, that's two screws in. And tight. So that's the whole door back together with the applique re-riveted, all the trims refitted except for the rubber on the leading edge, which if we removed it really carefully we could probably reattach, but I think it's possible to replace the whole of that L-shaped trim there if necessary. So there you go. All the seals and trims looking good. And the rear door assembled.